Hi, this is JoAnna Brandi, and welcome to Living on the Growing Edge. It's a crazy, changing, evolving, and expanding world. So, staying ahead today means more than just keeping up, it means exploring the frontiers of thought, innovation, ideation. In this long form video series, I bring you face to face with visionaries, disruptors, thinkers who are shaping tomorrow's workplaces and worlds by living out on the growing edge. They're reframing, reimagining, and re envisioning. And as I learned from my first guest, reinventing. So I'm happy you're here. Enjoy the series. You can always leave comments below and be sure to subscribe while you're here. This is JoAnna Brandi, and welcome to the Growing Edge program. Today I'm introducing and interviewing Chanel Phillips. Now, Chanel is a client of mine, full disclosure, and I love working with her. And we have developed a magnificent rapport over the last 2 years, and close to 2 years, if not that. And I learned something about her recently. And she is on the growing edge of learning what it's like to have an ADHD brain. Now, if you're a regular follower of this program, you've already heard me disclose the fact that I am a proud owner of an ADHD brain when I interviewed my own coach. So people could get an understanding of what this is, because right now what's happening is that women, especially executive women, powerful women with powerful careers, are being diagnosed left and right. So it's as if we have come out of the shadows, and many of us, me included, were diagnosed very late in life. And here we are left to try to figure out, what do we do with this brain? So when Chanel told me what was happening, when she took her son, I'm going to let her tell the story, but let me have her first tell you a little bit about her career, because Chanel has had a stunning career taking care of customers, managing customer service departments in all kinds of industries. And so she's dealing with people all the time with all the unique challenges that brings. So Chanel, welcome. We finally got this thing to work.
Yes. Hi, Joanna, and thank you for having me. Yes, I'm one of the many women, as they have coined us, high achieving women diagnosed with ADHD late in life. And one of the things that I want to say before I give you some of my background is all of the signs have always been there. We just didn't know what to look for.
Yeah.
And think the human brain and our divine ability to adapt and adjust so that we can be successful is really highlighted with these women, myself included, who have been able to do really significant things in their lives without ever knowing that, they were working against themselves. So I think just talking about this and making more women aware and talking about some of those early signs that I didn't realize were, textbook ADHD for women.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, I think it's pretty important to just get that information out there. So thank you for having this and having a platform so people can speak about this a little more openly.
And I want to thank you for your vulnerability, because this is not easy to talk about.
Yeah, and you're right. It's not easy to talk about. And I think we find greatness in the hard things that we do and the things that we do that are not always for our benefit, but for the benefit of others. So this is how I'm approaching this.
Good.
And also, I pride myself with living a life as an open book in the sense that wherever I am, whatever I do, I'm the same person. You're not going to find me, a different being in a different environment. So
Totally.
I'm just going to talk about it and it's okay. Um, so a little bit of my history, I was raised in a household that really focused on education and reading and making sure we had access to all of the things so that we could be successful in school. My parents were very focused on giving me opportunities and access to everything. Even though in the beginning, my parents, they were, kind of struggling financially. And we got to the point where my parents acquired a lot of comfort. But in the beginning, my parents were doing, I always say this, my parents did the Dave Ramsey method before Dave Ramsey.
I
So
know what the Dave Ramsey method is, so tell us.
So the method is when you are paid, you actually use cash and you separate that cash into envelopes based on your budget. Like, for instance, if your
Oh,
budget says you
that's what
have,
I did.
yeah, and you
I did not
separate
have
those in the envelopes, and that's what you spend, and that's it.
that's exactly what I did. I had no
Yeah.
idea there was a name for it. I thought I was very clever.
Yeah, most people found out about it through Dave Ramsey and his baby steps. My parents called it, the envelope method, and that's what they did and how they managed money. And I remember just a quick story. I remember my mom making a grocery list with the item and the price, and she would total it up with tax before we went to the store. And whatever that was, that's what she took to the store.
Wow, that's discipline.
That's a lot of discipline. And I was raised by two parents who are very disciplined people. So with that said, having ADHD and having kind of um, that sometimes not the ability to discipline myself, and what people don't realize is ADHD in women, the symptoms, the signs are different than they are in men. So as a little girl, what I was exhibiting was a lot of chattiness, a lot of friendliness, a lot of, and I would literally remember being in the classroom and hurrying up and finishing my work because it was boring.
Oh,
So
wow.
my thought process was, I don't want to do this. I have to do this or I'll get in trouble. So let me hurry up and finish it, get it done. And I would rush through the work and I'm sitting there twiddling my thumbs while my classmates are doing their work, and I'm chit-chatting with them and disrupting them because my little mind had to move on to something else. And had we known what, the kind of like the root of that was, it would have been a great opportunity for our teacher to say, well, hey, Chanel, you've gone through your work. Maybe you want to go back and check it. Maybe here's another assignment extra that's similar to what you were working on that you can work on this. Or hey, you like to draw. Why don't you just use this time and draw something, So there would have been a lot of avenues. But of course, during that time, and not to date myself, but I was a child in the early 80s. You sat and you were quiet in the
'80s
classrooms.
you were?
And I was born in the 70s, but I was a child in the 80s, yes.
Wow, I predate you way back. We got hit with rulers when we didn't do it right.
Yeah, well, I grew up in the South, so there was still some of that. And that presented a real pattern for me throughout my educational experience. How would I keep myself occupied so I did not disturb others? I remember specifically in fifth grade having to write lines, and I don't know if you know this, but when you got in trouble in school, a lot of times your teacher would make you write something 100 times. Like, I will not talk in class. I will not disturb others. I will not interfere with others, schoolwork, that kind of thing. I remember writing those, like, I can't tell you how many times I went home and that was my homework.
Wow.
Yes. Because keep in mind, if the teachers told me what the homework was, usually by the end of the school day, I finished it because
Wow.
I can do the regular work and my homework and move on to something else because my brain just needed to get through it.
Wow. Wow.
So
I
I
wasn't
would
that
finish
smart.
it. And that would be my homework, the
Oh
the
my
lines that I
gosh.
would have to write. And I remember my dad saying, and he just had a way of making me see things. So he understood my brain probably before I did. And he said, I understand that you're bored, but he said, do you want to be bored in school and then come home and have to do this too? So then you're making yourself bored twice. He was like, so if you have to be bored, just do it one time. So
Wise man.
yes. So that helped me, kind of frame, okay, this is what this is. So let me not do this behavior. And then there's that desire to, with a lot of us with ADHD, we like to please people. We are definitely and we're intuitive. A lot of us are empathic. So we feel the response from people when we feel the response when we've done something pleasing, and we feel the response when we've done something not so pleasing intensely. So that, that drive to, I wanted to please my teachers. I wanted to please, my parents. So I was going to behave and do what I needed to do. So just think about that going through, the whole K through 12 experience. And that's what it was. Then I get to college where the limits are a lot looser. I can kind of pick the courses I want to go to and things that interested me. So, with the exception of a lot of those prerequisite classes that a lot of us had to go through, I enjoyed college. College was great. Undergrad, I flourished. In my major, the only classes I struggled in were those that were not in my major and were not of interest to me. Within my major, I had pretty much straight A's. Outside of my major, maybe not so much.
What was your major? What was your major?
My major was political science.
Oh, wow.
So my goal was to go to law school. That was my goal. Simply because people told me all my life, you should go to law school. You like to talk, you like to debate, you know, you get along with people, and you should just be a lawyer. And my dad was actually like, when he would introduce me, like in high school, I remember this when I was 16, we're just out, and some friends said, "Hey, this is your oldest daughter." And he said, "Yeah, she's going to be a lawyer." And I was 16 at the time. So that was in my head. I'm going to be a lawyer. So I went to Spelman College for undergrad. And I just mentioned that because Spelman is very robust, challenging academic environment. But I loved it because I was in the presence of some people who I read about, when it came to academia and politics. And I got to sit there and be taught by them. One of my professors at Spelman was Dr. Christine Ferris, who was Dr. King's sister. So just being, just being in the presence of people I'd read about, saw on the news, my parents had spoken about, was amazing. So I, I loved undergrad, thrived in it. One of the other signs of ADHD in women that not is not so much in men. Men are often identified because they can't focus, they can't sit still, they can't. With women, we hyper focus. So we hyper focus on a project, or we hyper focus on a thing, and then once in the way I describe it is, once I have gotten all out of this thing that I think I can get, I move on to something else. And when it comes to working in a career or working in being a student, that's rewarding. That can be very rewarding. But it's still part of ADHD that, if unchecked, leads to other things, leads to other problems. Yeah, absolutely. So I went into my career. My career was by accident. And I say it was by accident. I did an internship late in my undergrad years, at a law firm, and realized I didn't like it. I didn't like the practice. I love the theory of law. I love, I love reading about it. I love reading, Supreme Court rulings and, the arguments. And I love all of that about it. And the application of law when it's done at its highest level, that is so inspiring to me. But the practice of it every day, I didn't like it.
Oh, you have that right. Like, sometimes you don't know until you get there.
Correct. And that's another thing that I tell people all the time, especially young people that I may mentor. Whatever you think you want to do, find a way to do it early. Right. So you find out whether or not you really like it, And so I did that, realized I don't want to do this, didn't go to law school, and instead came home after I graduated from undergrad and really didn't want to do anything. Wow. Once again, having a conversation with my dad. And he said, "What do you want to do?" Because at the time I was working at a restaurant. I was waiting tables at a restaurant and, making tips and kind of hanging out with my friends. And, I was like, I want to travel. And he said, "Well, you need to work." As a matter of fact, I was borrowing money so I could go on a trip when this conversation came up. And he was like, "Well, you need to probably work for an airline if you want to travel." And so he says, "I know a lady." Give me your resume, and I know a lady who's hiring. And he gave my resume to a woman who was hiring for an airline, and that's how my career started. You know, I started working in reservations part time, and my career grew from a reservations rep to a corporate trainer to a supervisor to a special. I was a supervisor over what most people identify as red coats. They're the people who help you when your flight's been canceled or, an emergency, something out of the norm has happened. And so I did that for a while and then went into the GM role as a manager at various different locations throughout the system. So in my airline career, which spanned 17 years, I started out in reservations, went to the airport operations and became a leader there. And then I went back into the contact center environment as the manager over our customer relations at the time. And what that group did, we solved all the problems that happened after the fact. So your flight's been canceled and they can't do anything for you at the airport. My group resolved the issue. Um, a flight attendant spilled coffee on you and ruined your suit. My team would be the one who arranged the dry cleaning and the whole thing. So
now you ended up with a rather famous airline, though. You started out with a small airline.
Yes. And to be honest with you, yes. So I started off with the first airline I worked for was ValueJet. I don't know if you remember ValueJet. ValueJet was one of the first low cost carriers. And I worked for ValueJet, and then ValueJet acquired AirTran Airways and then became AirTran Airways. So then I worked for AirTran. The bulk of my career was with AirTran. And then we were acquired. AirTran was acquired by Southwest Airlines. And so the end of my career in the airline industry, I worked with Southwest. And once we were acquired by Southwest, I moved into the contact center leader role. And the center leader is just equivalent to a GM for our contact center at the time in Atlanta and Carrollton, Georgia.
So during that time, actually, before we go to during that time, could you tell our listeners how you found out? Because you were also late, not as late as I was, but you were also fairly late in life diagnosed. So
yes.
Would you share with us how this happened? Because it was just recently, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the diagnosis really started the concept that something was awry started when my eldest son, who's now 10, when he was 4 years old, we went through a battery of tests. My husband, our pediatrician, and his preschool teacher, we started seeing signs and we weren't sure what those signs were with his behavior. He has like a social anxiety, but it's the opposite of what most people have, where you don't want to be engaged with a lot of people. My son loved everyone and he saw everyone on equal footing as his friend, whether you were the stranger in the supermarket or the person who lived next door. And as a mom with a 4-year-old, that made me super nervous. And we spoke with his, oh yeah. We were like, oh my goodness, he loves everybody. That's not a good thing. And so there were some other things too. My son has always been very bright and he had this intense focus on the planets and stars. So before he was 4 years old, he could tell you every planet in the solar system. He could tell you their distance from the Earth. He can tell you, what phase the sun was in and how many billions of years before it became, like a giant star. And, he just absorbed that information. And it was a little bit more than a precocious child just being really interested. That's all he wanted to talk about. He didn't want to talk about anything else. And every toy or every game that he had, he made them all into other models of the solar system. So with Play-Doh, he created planets with Play-Doh, and that was one solar system. He got a set of Legos. He created planets with the Legos, and that was another solar system. And
I thought
so,
he's a genius.
yeah,
Is he?
well,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say he's a genius, but he's exceptional. Yeah, he's
Okay.
definitely exceptional. And so we decided, okay, well, maybe we need to get him tested to see if he's on the spectrum. And so part of the testing to see if he was on the spectrum included ADHD testing. So what we found out is that he is, with the spectrum being a range, he has mild, what had formerly been identified as Asperger's. So it's mild, and he also has a little bit of social, and I can't remember the phrase now, but basically, um, he sees everyone as equals. Like his friendship with this one person is no more deeper or important than his friendship with this other person. He understands the difference between family and other people, but outside of that core group, everyone was his friend, and everyone deserved, his time and his attention. And he worried about strangers if he saw someone that was having a bad day that he may not have known, even to the point where he would go up to them and he would say, "Are you okay?" so, so once again, it when you think about it, it's beautiful to have that mindset, but as a parent, it's so unnerving. So, once we identified that, and he doesn't have ADHD, but as we went through the testing, and I sometimes, and my husband, but mostly I was present for all of the testing. And I would sit, either in the room with them while they were testing, or some of the tests, I would sit out of the room, but be in a observation room where I could see and hear the questions. And as we were going through the process and they got to the portion of the testing where they were asking the questions about ADHD, and asking my husband and I as parents things that we noticed that would pertain to ADHD. I remember telling my husband, "This sounds like me. I think
Wow.
this is me," you know. And my husband, who's actually a genius, said,
Gee, I wonder how that happened. My gosh, girl.
he says, "Well, then I don't know. Maybe you should, talk to somebody about it." And I was like, "Okay." So, and keep in mind, this was my son's now 10, and my official formal diagnosis took place less than a year ago.
Wow.
Because life happens, and we spent most of our time getting him all of the resources and the services he needed, and so I kind of put my diagnosis on the back burner. And then COVID happened and the world shut down, and our priorities changed.
Right.
And so finally, when everything got back to normal, I decided I would talk to my internal medicine doctor, who referred me to first, she referred me to a website. She's like, "Well, go on this website, take this test before you make an appointment, to go through the whole thing." I did that, and the website confirmed, yes, you likely have ADHD. And then I was referred to a therapist who actually ran the battery of tests, and which I took, like I said, well, I said less than a year. It's been a little over a year now. Yeah, it's been a little over a year
How
now.
how did you feel when you realized while doing these tests, oh, this sounds like me? What were you
Mhm.
feeling? What were you thinking? What was going on inside there?
The first thing I thought when I was thinking, yeah, this sounds like me, was I wonder if I was ever tested as a child. And so I remember I
Oh
asked my
gosh.
mom. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember asking my mom, was I ever tested as a child? I remember going through lots of testing. I remember being identified as a gifted child and them wanting to skip me and send me to a grade or two ahead, and my parents saying no because they wanted me to have that social development.
Hmm.
And I was like, in that whole process, was I tested for ADHD? And she said no. She was like, no, you've never been tested for ADHD. And then she goes, however, there are some signs there.
No.
And yeah, I was like, really? She's like, yeah, but you never had any problems in school, so we didn't worry about
Well, and truly, you don't need to worry about it if your life is working just well. But
it. Yeah.
if it impacts people's lives in different ways, many
Yeah.
different ways, and some people survive just fine with it because they have other people in their lives that are able to pick up the slack. I
Right.
identified only from Dr. Amen's website. I identified years ago my mother had ADHD because
Hmm.
I saw, oh my God, I saw the patterns completely. And she, yeah,
Yes.
brilliant woman. She was a lawyer, brilliant woman. She was an artist, but she left a trail behind her wherever she went. You know?
Yes.
And other people had to sort of pick up the slack. Now, fortunately, she was at some point in her career able to make sure she had household help, make sure so she had everything that she needed. The older she got, though, the more
Right.
evident it became. And what alerted me to it is that um, my mother was a clothes horse. She loved clothes. She loved
Hmm.
stuff. And she would come home and she hated trying anything on. So she would come home with all these clothes. And then she had me and my sister-in-law and my other sister-in-law. And she didn't even try
Yes.
on. She would just come home and say, oh, none of these fit me. You girls take them. You know,
Yeah.
well, the ones that did fit her, and after she passed, going through her closet or when she would give me clothes, every single one of them had the tag cut out in the back. And she wasn't really good with the razor blade. So a lot of my sweaters have little holes in the back where she had,
That sounds very familiar.
you couldn't stand the feel on her. It was hysterical. Who even knew? And when I started creating a little bit of an interest in it, I saw Dr. Amen's website and I said, oh my God. But he identified, there's like, I don't know, 10 or 12 different types. So there's
Hmm.
a lot of different kinds of ADHD. And I think
Yes.
we all exhibit different qualities. There are some, though, that we all have, I think.
Yes.
Time blindness being one of them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. I think the time blindness, and and I've been doing some reading, and I think um, in the reading I have with women, especially, it's more pronounced during periods of heightened hormonal fluctuations. So
Yeah.
when you're pregnant, postpartum, that sort of thing, going through puberty, and once again, looking back, the signs were there when I remember being pregnant with my first son, and after having him going through postpartum anxiety,
Oh.
not depression, but anxiety, but the behaviors, because my behaviors just looked like an overprotective first time mom. People dismissed it as, oh, she's just a first time mom. With the second one, she won't do this, things that for me, the anxiety manifested itself with everything had to be, first of all, the house had to be scrubbed and cleansed every day because I didn't want germs.
Oh.
um,
That could be first time
and
mom. That could be a first time mom.
it could be first time mom, but also everything looked like either a weapon or a threat to me. Everything and everyone was a weapon or a threat to me. Yeah, and so after he was about 6 months old, that dissipated. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, was this the first time mom craziness? I'm fine. And after my second one was born and it came back, and I was like, oh, okay, this is familiar. I
Mm-hmm.
know it will pass. I don't know why I'm having these thoughts. And what I did was, instead of acting on them like I did with my first son, I just talked about it. I talked about it with my husband. I talked about it with my mom, with my sisters, especially my sister who had children already and understood, and she would say, "Yeah, that's a little different."
A little
That's a
different.
little different than the typical mama bear thing there. So, And I was like, yeah, but it usually goes away in a little while. And it did. And so once again, maybe everything is a spectrum, and maybe I'm at the extreme end of the spectrum when it comes to that, not knowing that all of that was part and parcel to the ADHD. So
I think they're still discovering what is part and parcel of ADHD.
I agree.
Now that they know that women can have it, and
Yes.
now that they are finding women, very often high achieving women, who have it, and maybe that's just the circles I hang out in or what I read or whatever. But now they're really putting some time and effort into understanding it. I find for myself, having a coach who knows all this stuff is helpful, because that way I don't have to research it all. I've always researched everything, which is so interesting,
Mhm.
because here I was diagnosed and I did very little research other than the doctor that was going to put the goo on my head, or the other person. I did very little research. And there
Wow.
probably was, it was only 10 years ago. So
Yes.
probably was research, because I know that the main doctor in this area, oh my gosh, what's his name? You know who I'm talking about. Oh, let's see, is forgetfulness part? No. Name will come to me as we're speaking. Who had discovered that he had ADHD and made his career.
Hmm.
Yeah, he's been around for a while, but for some reason, I neglected diving into it. But I think it's because I had already been diagnosed with PTSD, and I was up to
Yeah.
my eyeballs with therapy and all that other stuff. And when the therapist would say, we have the strangest feedback going on here. Well, I hope that we'll be able to get it out with a good audio editor.
I
Um,
hope so.
yeah, I don't know what's doing that. The microphone is turned off, so I don't know what's doing it. Um, but every time that I talked to somebody about it, the only thing they would say to me is, "You have to take drugs," and I was like, "No, I'm not."
Yeah.
So I shut the door.
Yes. And
So
it's interesting that you said that. I'm glad that you talked about people saying, "Oh, you're going to have to take something." My experience was different, and maybe because your diagnosis was 10 years ago, people have grown and developed and learned a little bit more about it. So when I met with a therapist who diagnosed me, I asked her, "So what do I do now?" She was like, "You've managed it your entire life." And she says, unless it becomes a hindrance, and she was like, everything ebbs and flows, and there may come a point where you need a little bit more help, or you need to change your mechanisms that you use to manage it. So she gave me a lot of resources to read and review. And she said, and she's like, there's some conversations about diet being,
yes, and
you know,
exercise.
and exercise. So I want to say the last 3 months, I've started a regular exercise routine where I'm walking at least 3 times a day, sometimes not a day, a week, sometimes more. I'm getting outside, my working with my internal medicine doctor also, she's very much about making sure that most of your nutrients are coming from whole foods, and where you can't get those nutrients, supplement with vitamins and things that you can take. So she's helped me to start to identify where I'm deficient, what I need to substitute that I'm not really getting from my organic diet. And also I'm working with nutrition as well. So all of that,
Yes,
um,
also.
about doing all of that before medication, because she said if you're already managing it without having the awareness of it, now that you have the awareness of it, and it's a holistic problem, it's not a
Right, right.
always a mental problem. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And I've worked with you for a long time, and I never would have guessed it. I never would have guessed it. You're always on time. Everything you prepare meticulously for everything. The way you deal with your team is exquisite. I'm like, "Whew." I just so admire you. I never would have said, "Oh, she must have ADHD." Now, Steve, on the other hand, it's a pretty good
That's
guess.
the duck under the duck with the paddling under the water, and all you see is it gliding, but you don't see that's what's happening there. But this is a lifetime of putting in controls and mechanisms to ensure that, things get done. My calendar is color coded. I don't know why. I started color coding my calendars way back in the 90s where I had an actual desk calendar and I would use highlighters and, and people would laugh like, "Oh, I had one coworker tell me one time, your calendar, I love it. It always looks like Skittles." So, and the for me, color coding things helps me to keep things in line and prioritize things. If something's green on my calendar, I know that that's something that has to do with recruiting or hiring. If something is red on my calendar, that's a deliverable. That's important. I have to get that done. Something's yellow, it's just a reminder. It's optional. It's not anything that's important. So just different things to help me kind of assess my day, understand where my attention is most needed, and focus on that. And like I said, when I was younger and I would do schoolwork, especially schoolwork I didn't like to do, I would do it quickly to get, and that's what I do as an adult. Things I don't want to do at work, I do it first thing in the morning, and I get it out of the way so I can get to the good stuff.
That's the concept of eating the frog first, right? There's a book,
Yeah.
Eat the Frog. I bury the frog. I just bury the frog. And eventually the frog gets so far under there, I forget the frog exists. So that's why I work with a coach.
Yes. I eat the frog in the morning, get it out of the way. And that's not always the best thing to do, because keep in mind, a lot of things that are on my plate that I don't like to do, I put it at the beginning of the day to get through it. Sometimes I miss taking the time to reflect on it, because even if I don't like it, it may be something that is impactful. It may be something that I need to reflect on, or I can get additional growth and information out of. But I'm often just so thrilled that, okay, that's off my plate. Now I can go do this. That I don't allow that thing to really, me to really be mindful about, what did I just do? What was that conversation like? What did I get from it? What did the other person get from it? And I say things like, for instance, and this is going to sound strange, terminations. I have, throughout my career as a leader who's had to, terminate quite a few people. I work with HR closely, and I do it first thing in the morning. So I say, for my benefit and for the person's benefit, let's not linger all day, and have this thing, because even if the person, we've identified that this is just no longer a good coupling and we need to separate because, we're not good for this employee, and this employee is not good for the company. It is still a burden to have to terminate someone as a leader. It never gets normal. It never gets comfortable. And I am always mindful of the fact that I'm impacting a household. I am impacting someone's ability to take their kids on vacation. I'm impacting someone's self-esteem. A lot of people, regardless of their performance, they really see their work as part of who they are. And when that ends, and so I'm very mindful of that. And being empathic, I feel it, so it's usually not the most pleasant thing to have happen. So wherever possible, I try to do it as early in the morning as I can. And I do all the paperwork and all the things that I have to do, and I'm done. And I get to move on to something else. However, in that interaction, there's still value.
Yeah. That's got to be. I mean, I've had to fire people in my career, but not a whole lot of them. Probably not the volume that you have, and I find it extremely uncomfortable, even if they haven't done a good job.
Yeah.
Even if they haven't done a good job, I find it really, really. There was only one time that I can remember where she so deserved it.
Yeah.
She dug her own hole.
Yes. And I will say that there are times when, like, they say you have this person dead to rights. So there's no question that this is the right thing to do. Still didn't feel good. Yeah.
No, no. I know. Well, I think that's when you're an empath, and I want to ask you about that because I also, as you know, am an empath. Um, when you're an empath, you can feel what they're feeling, and you can.
Mhm.
It's really a burden to feel other people's feelings. Do you have a practice that you do because you work with so many people in such a large space? What do you do to keep from absorbing all that energy around you, which throws the ADHD off? Then, of course,
Mhm.
then
Yes.
then you're off balance. If it's just you, you can probably manage it pretty well. But if now you're carrying a bunch of other people's energy in your field, what do you have
Yes.
a practice that you use or something that how you keep yourself clean and clear of other people's stuff?
Yes, I do. I have something that I do at the beginning of the day and then in the middle of the day. The beginning of the day is prayer, and that is how I start my day. I read scripture before I leave. My husband and we pray. And then when I come to work, I try to, a lot of times in the car, I don't listen to any music. I just kind of think about what we discussed, what I've read, what we talked about, what we prayed about. And when I get to work, I'm usually very clear and my mind is able to focus on, the day. Now throughout the day with those different touches that we have with people and those different interactions and you get all of those feels and all of the things that are happening with them during my lunch hour, I always disconnect. So either if I'm going to work out, I do it during lunch and I have on my headphones and I listen to whatever I want to listen to that day. For me it's music. Music just soothes me and I love music. I love lyrics and I love, I can get lost in them.
Oh,
And so that
beautiful.
allows me to disconnect. And so if I'm walking outside, I'm walking on the treadmill during lunch, I'll have my headphones on and I'll just allow myself to disconnect and get lost in that music. And then if I'm not going to work out that day or if my schedule just doesn't allow for it, I take some time, even if it's 15, 20 minutes, and I go somewhere quiet. It may be my car, it may be an empty conference room. I just go somewhere quiet that's not my desk because people are constantly, coming
Good.
and I do whatever I want to do. Sometimes I listen to music. Sometimes I read something on my e-reader. Sometimes I watch an episode of Love is Blind. It's just whatever I want to do for that time and it allows me to disconnect and that is something that I had to learn to do because early in my career for me I felt I have this great work ethic. I work through lunch. I get things done. I'm productive. I was famous for sitting at my desk eating a sandwich, and that's not always the best thing to do. So it took me probably up until I would say about 5 years ago in my
Really,
career to say, I'm going to take some time out of my day every day and disconnect.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And this is it's what's amazing to me is how you have uh, built in a lot of these things that are remedies for
Hmm.
ADHD. My coach, her tagline is "I'm your guide for the dopamine deprived." I didn't get that until I actually started working with her. I was like, because from working with me, I study all those chemicals. I can tell you
Yes.
what happens in your body when you're happy and what happens in your body when all of that. But I never realized that what we have is a shortage of dopamine,
Yeah.
which is why we have to get up and do something and or eat something.
Hmm.
I have to tell you that I am finding mushrooms, not the hallucinogenic
Okay.
kind, just the
Never.
I have some, gummy mushrooms, and I'm finding them
Yes.
very, very helpful at keeping me focused. So there's whatever the compounds are in those mushrooms.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Well, it's
in my case, I have to stay away from the sugar because I could eat sugar all day long.
that's true. Sugar is a thing for me. I'm working on it. Mushrooms. I a coworker introduced me to mushroom coffee. I love coffee and coffee. It's not really the caffeine for me, and it may be, I don't know, because they say some people with ADHD, caffeine helps you to focus. I love coffee. I love the taste of it, the smell of it,
Yeah.
there's a ritual to making coffee with your cream and your sugar, and I love all of that. And I can do that any time of day. Like I can drink coffee at dinner and go to bed without a problem. So it
Oh,
doesn't
wow.
bother me in that way. But she introduced me to mushroom coffee and I've tried it. And you know what? I think there is some component to it that helps you focus
Yeah.
because I remember drinking and I was like, are you sure there's no caffeine in this? Because regular coffee doesn't do this to me. Like,
Oh, wow.
and I didn't feel anxiety, but um, I definitely felt that light switch.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I would say there's some merit to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the experimentation they're doing on it, which is really awesome.
Mhm.
They're doing a lot of experimentation on it because it's a food group. You know, it's
Yes.
for me it's been very, very, very good. Do you have any other hacks that I guess that's the word for it, hacks that you use to make up for I'm a timer girl. I have clocks all over the place.
Yes.
I have one of these
I
a visual timer. Um, I have to set because I also hyper focus and I
Mhm.
never know what's going to happen. Will I get the job done or will I be here 4 hours later, starving,
Right.
trying to finish the job? So I've had to bring more focus to saying, I'm going to do this for 40 minutes. And then I
Right.
get myself out of the chair. And it's amazing how iterative I have to be. But again, I think it's because I always had a lot of workarounds, but I'm not sure if they're
Mhm.
all the right workarounds.
It's trial and error when, especially when you are new to it and you're still trying to figure out what works best for you. It is trial and error. I avoided getting an Apple Watch for many years because I felt like it's going to be a distraction. Because when I am at work or in a focus mode, I take my cell phone and I put it in a drawer because if a notification pops up, it's a squirrel and I'm going to pay attention to it. So I have to put it in a drawer someplace. And so I said, I'm not going to get an Apple Watch. That's going to be a distraction. So up until this past, I want to say Christmas, I wore just a regular watch, and I learned though with the Apple Watch, there's like a mindfulness app that you can put on your
It
watch.
must be right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And it gives me reminders and I set it and you can set for whatever notifications you want that works with you.
Mhm.
And I set my notifications for every hour for 10 minutes, it tells me to move. So whether it be getting up and walking to the restroom or getting another cup of coffee or just walking, upstairs and coming back down, whatever I move and that helps me focus.
And that is wonderful. And that's a really
Yeah.
important thing. I find that especially if I'm working on a project, like there's a project that I've had and I need to get it done. And I, the bell goes off
Mhm.
and I say to myself, get up and move. And I get up like that, and then I go, let me just do one more little thing, and then I find out I'm sitting because I have back issues and shoulder issues. I think
Mhm.
what kept mine at bay for so long is I was a yogi for
Oh
35
yes.
years. 35 years. I did yoga 6 times a week. I identified as that. But when I
Yes.
started getting injured, I went to the opposite. I didn't want to go to a yoga class. I didn't want to try to do yoga. I didn't, so my body changed. I tore my rotator cuff from yoga. So I
Oh
kept
wow.
injuring myself. So I went from being kind of an athlete, I guess,
Mhm.
sedentary. And that's been
Yes.
not good. That's been not good. I'm trying to work. I do one yoga class a week and it's a relaxation, it's a restorative yoga. So mostly we lie down.
Yes.
So I'm okay with that. But I'm trying to build all of that back in my life because I know it has to do with my cognitive functioning. And if I
Yes.
got it, if I have to keep working and I have to keep working, wow, at my age with all this stuff, it's like, oh, so for me, it's the what do I need to say to myself to
Right.
get into the place where I actually do get up and move. and shake.
Yes.
I was at the chiropractor's today. He said to you, because you focus so intense, you need to get up and shake. You need to like shake. So I've been doing that. I leave here at night. I go to the beach, and if anybody looks at me, the first thing is I shake everything. I shake my limbs.
Yes.
I just like, let me shake off the day. So
I
we're all
love it.
learning. We're all learning, you know?
And you talked about that in the course that we took with you about when the gazelle escapes the lion, the first thing they do is kind of shake it off. And I started doing that when something big or traumatic or something that would give me anxiety. Once I'm through it, I just kind of shake it out, and it works.
It
It
does.
works.
It does
Yeah.
because it distributes the chemicals in your this. Otherwise, the cortisol stays there. You know,
Yeah.
you've got to get those chemicals out of your body. So yeah, it's a real learning experience. I learn something about it every week. I don't know whether you've
Mhm.
experienced this, and you may not have because you're way younger than I am. Um, I've experienced intense grief
Yes. Yes.
too.
Yes. Absolutely. Um, in different phases, like of course when you lose someone, I've experienced that, but I've also experienced intense grief. For instance, in my career, when we were acquired, when airtrain was acquired by Southwest, I didn't realize, but through the integration I was grieving, because it was the death of a company that I loved and grew up with,
Wow.
and our culture, even though airtrain and Southwest cultures were well matched, they were not exact. There were some differences. And so that culture going away and adopting to another one, that I didn't realize it was grief that I was going through.
Oh,
And I don't think a lot of people realize that even when you leave one company and go to another, if you decide to do it, and because it's a better opportunity, there's still a little bit of grief there because a lot of you forge friendships at work,
right.
your routine changes at work. You become, a lot of times you go from being an expert, a subject matter expert, and the voice in the room that people listen to being a new person that no one wants to talk to because you don't know anything. So
Right. Wow. Wow. Which is
yeah.
which is
So
probably one of the reasons I didn't because a lot of people say to me, why didn't you get a job? If it was so hard to work by yourself, because I mean I've had coach after coach after coach
oh
say,
yes.
get a job or get a partner because you can't do this. But I
Yes.
steadfastly did it. And whew, a wave here because I felt better being
Yes.
yeah, even if it wasn't what
Yes.
I wanted, it was not having to deal with other people and their energy and all that. So the grieving
Right.
comes from what could have happened in those 10 or 15 or 20 years that didn't.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something that I'm getting used to and I'm living with. But boy, I'll tell you, if I had only known, which is
Yeah.
why I think we're doing
It's
this,
tough.
if I had only understood. But what
Yes.
surprises me though, now that I'm thinking about it, I haven't thought about this before. All of the times I took all those personality tests, every
Yes.
and I took them all, because of my work. I tried this, I tried
Mhm.
that, I tried the Colby, I tried this, I tried all of them, and they all said the same thing. You're a great starter. You're not a good finisher. They all basically say the same thing. When it comes to creativity, you're like a genius, but when it comes to this, you don't even want to balance your, whatever it is. But now
Yes.
those people suggested that maybe the profile that I had was the profile that I had because it was ADHD, not one.
Wow. I get exactly what you're saying. I didn't go through all of those tests until I went to grad school. And part of I got an MBA from Emory University, and one of the things I loved about Emory University was that they understood that what you get out of your program, is really about who you bring into the program,
Uh-huh.
and they wanted to create awareness not only for you but also for the professors. So every professor, every every person in our department that we worked with, they understood what our profile was. They understood how to communicate with me. You
Uh-huh.
know, they understood, how to interact with me. So it would benefit me, and they were um, very purposeful about that. So I did the Myers Briggs, and I did all of these different tests. And they were very clear. This is just a preference. It shows you how you operate or how you manifest in different environments. It's not a testament to who you are at the core of who you are, but this is just gives you an idea of these things work well for you. These things are going to be a challenge for you. So just come into the situation understanding that so you can better manage it. And then people who are working with you can better communicate with you. And I really love that. And that's when I started realizing, okay, yeah, I do have these things that I think, but no, there was never any idea of, there may be some neurodivergence that could impact this, because this is all of these tests are from a standpoint of typical, neurology,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
There's a wonderful guy that got introduced to me after the very first time I was brave enough to put the words ADHD in a post on LinkedIn. One of my
mhm.
colleagues said, "You have to talk to this guy." And he runs a network, he's in Holland or something, called the Octopus Movement.
Okay.
And these are all neurodivergent people. And they come together. I don't get to too many of the meetings, but the ones I do, they're very interesting because he's pulling together all kinds of neurodiversity together and talk about problems that have to be solved.
Yes.
So it's really interesting because we're good at problem solving. And when you
I
get
love
other people, yeah, I'll send you the contact information. His name is Perry Knopfert, like a Knoppert or
that.
something.
Okay.
But it was kind of a relief to find that there are people talking about it, there are people doing things about it. I'm very glad that this is happening. I think
Yes.
I think there's other sides of it in my family, but nobody wants to talk about it. So
Hmm.
so
Now,
you have to stay to yourself when that happens. You have to just say, okay, well, when they're ready to look at it as possibility, they'll look. I can't get involved.
that's true. Everyone has to get to it on their, in their own journey. And I will say too, where I am now, I'm still really trying to identify the best methods of coping at this stage in my life, because some of
Absolutely.
the things I used to work well for me in the past, like for instance, music. And every office I've ever worked in, anyone can tell you, you walk in, there's music playing in the back. Sometimes it's imperceptible, but there was always music playing in the background because music helps me focus. Instrumental music, specifically, um, jazz, or either I call it light classical, but
Okay.
it helps me focus. And in my environment now, that's not an option. So I had to create something else that, that's kind of there humming in the background to help me to focus. So just that journey and finding what's the best coping mechanism. I think all of that, it changes over time as you change and your environment changes, and that it continues to be the journey. It continues to be part of the journey.
Yeah. I use a tool called Focus at Will. I have to pay for it. It seems crazy
Hmm.
with all the other stuff that's out there, but Focus at Will is music specifically designed to help you focus. So when I want to do a project, the Focus at Will goes on.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
And I found it on, it's either SoundCloud or Spotify. I can't remember. It's called Focus Music, and so
Oh,
I've
there you
used
go.
that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
check. I'll check on that. So we've been talking a lot. Well, we always talk a long time because we love talking to each other.
Yes.
So wonderful. Um, but what would you like to leave our listeners with? Is there a lesson? Is there a just suggestions you have for people? What would you like to leave them with as we go ahead and close this?
I will say if you feel you may have symptoms and you haven't been diagnosed, absolutely get diagnosed as soon as possible. Work with your doctor or your therapist in order to get the diagnosis, because once again, the diagnosis doesn't change who you are. You've always been that person, and if you've managed it well. But there's a peace in knowing that, okay, there is something that's a little different, and I approach thinking and I approach situations differently than others, and that's okay. I just need to know that that's just who I am. Because for me, it helped with self-confidence when it came to situations that were difficult for me. It helped me to understand why. There's nothing wrong with me. I just approach it differently. And it helps me to manage it better. So that's the one thing I want people to, if you have a thought about it, go get it checked out. Another thing is high achievement and ADHD pair very well together.
Okay. I can't wait till high salaries and ADHD pair very well. I'm waiting for that to come.
So, most of those symptoms, especially for women that people value in the corporate world, they are a superpower for us. That being able to think along two different lanes at the same time and multitask. The key to that is build a team around you that can shore up those areas where you're not the strongest. And once again, you'll be the superwoman in the building, because we're able to do a lot of things that other people struggle to do.
Absolutely.
And I think the last thing is your immediate collaborators, whether it be your spouse, your partner, your coworker, and I would say, whoever you report to, your boss, your manager, be honest with them if you're diagnosed. And there's two things to that. Be honest with them so they understand, here's something that I've identified that I won't even say struggle with. I identified as part of me, and here's what I'm doing to manage it. And here's some things that I've identified that may have negatively impact either my work or my project or whatever, or even my work life balance. And here's what I'm doing to control it. So they understand the transition and the change that you're doing.
Wow.
So
that takes a ton of courage, a ton of courage.
It does. And this is the thing. If you find yourself in a work environment where you cannot trust your colleagues, your immediate colleagues, and your boss to have that conversation, rethink your work environment.
Wow.
So to me, that was important. I had that conversation with my boss, Brian, and he was like you. I would have never known. And I was like, and you'll never know. I'm just letting you know.
Wow.
Here's the best way to communicate with me, And
wow.
The same thing with, my immediate colleague, Tiffany, who you've met, who's absolutely lovely in every way. And she understands how my brain works, and she communicates to me in a way that that helps me to absorb and internalize things. And the fact that when I told her, she never changed how she interacted with me from a respect and from a colleague level, but how she communicates with me, she adapted to the preference. So I just,
Wow.
and it's just make my work life so much better, because now I have allies who are kind of, on the journey with me. Yeah.
You sure do. You got some real good support there. That's really, and she's an amazing person to start with. But
yeah, she is.
That's got to feel just fabulous to have those allies who understand you.
Yes.
So that's great.
Yes, it does.
That's some great advice to people to tell the truth and to be courageous and take a look at your situation and see if maybe you're ready for a new one.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Thank you so much for all your time. And
yes, you are welcome.
This takes a while to process, and I'm hoping that the sound issues don't we'll just have to see what happens with it because I don't know if it's my computer or your big conference room, or I have no idea.
Yeah. On my end, it sounds perfect.
Yeah, so it's coming from my computer then. That's what's a little disturbing. At least the picture's clear yesterday. Yesterday I
Yes.
was on several Zoom calls and I would zoom in and zoom out and zoom in. I'm like, oh no, because I after this I have to do a podcast. So I'm like, oh my God. So fortunately, when I rebooted everything up this morning, I was like, oh good, the camera's working. But yeah, it was. The last thing I like to deal with is the technology. So yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
very, very grateful for you taking the time because I think women, especially women, have to really start paying attention to how to use their gifts as best they
Yes.
can. And the more that other people know about it, the more we can develop our own support systems for, when we need to ask somebody for help or the signs that we're struggling or any of that is really, really important to be clear about it and to be courageous about it and to say,
Yes.
I'm over here and I can create this amazing thing over here, but could you help me over here? Because I'm really not good at that. So I think that takes a lot of courage.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate once again you having a platform so we can have this conversation. It never occurred to me that the value of it until we had our conversation. So thank you.
Yes, and you can take this once it's all processed and everything, and you can be interested to see what you do with it because sending it around to
Okay.
other managers or sending it around to other people because
Yes,
it's a way for you to tell them if you haven't told them
I
yet.
agree.
It's a nice way for you to tell them with the whole picture, not just the slice.
Yes, yes, because it's a story and a journey. I
It's a
agree. I
story.
agree.
It's a story.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend.